You ever noticed how the official reasons for big international events always sound, well, so noble? Today, we're going to dive into the history of that kind of language. It's a pattern that analysts have been tracking for centuries, and it really shows how powerful countries talk about what they're doing on the world stage.
I mean, it's a fair question, right? If a country is really just after something like oil, why don't they just say it? Well, the answer is pretty fascinating. It all comes down to this really powerful communication strategy that's been refined for more than a century.
And that's where this idea of the moral cover comes in. That's what analysts call it. It's really the key concept for us today, and it's basically a framework that helps us make sense of that gap, the one between what's said publicly and what might actually be going on.
So what is it exactly? Well, to put it simply, moral cover is the official story. It's all about using language that everyone agrees with, words like freedom, human rights, security, to get people on board with actions that otherwise might look a little self-serving. The whole point is to get that stamp of approval, both from your own citizens and from other countries. Okay, so to really get how this works, let's take a trip back in time. Our first stop, the age of European colonial expansion. This is the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a time when oil was becoming the most important resource on the planet. It was literally fueling the navies and factories that were key to global power. Now, back then, the language they used was totally different from what we hear today. The main justification, the big one, was this idea of the civilizing mission. You heard this all the time. The story was that colonial powers were bringing order, modern government, and education to so-called backward places. They sold it as this noble duty, protecting locals from each other or ending bad stuff like slavery. And this is where you could see the two stories right next to each other. The public story was all about uplifting societies and bringing order. But when you look at what historians point to, there's this other, much more strategic motive running in parallel. They needed to secure fuel for their massive navies and control key shipping lanes. That moral language it made the strategic goal go down a lot easier.
All right, let's fast forward a bit. After World War II, the world just completely changed. The whole idea of old-school colonialism, that wasn't going to fly anymore. It just wasn't seen as legitimate. So, naturally, the language of power had to change with it. And this is when we see a big shift into what a lot of analysts call the American era. And the new justifications, they sounded totally different. The focus moved away from a civilizing mission and towards defending these big abstract ideas. During the Cold War, it was all about defending freedom, stopping communism, and promoting democracy. And then, more recently, the script flipped again. Now the language is centered on things like humanitarian intervention, fighting terrorism, and upholding international law, often with the backing of coalitions or the UN.
And here we go again, the contrast is just as clear. The reasons we hear out loud are about protecting people, stopping a genocide or fighting terrorists, but critics will often point to what they see as a very consistent theme underneath it all, making sure the global oil supply stays stable and maintaining a strong influence in those parts of the world that have all the energy.
So you might be thinking, okay, so it's all just a big lie, right? Well, what the analysis suggests is that it's actually a bit more sophisticated than that. It's not necessarily about making up reasons from scratch. It's more about being really selective about which truths you highlight. It's really an art form, the art of selective framing.
This table really lays it all out pretty clearly. You can see the evolution, right? In the colonial era, getting people on board was all about a narrative of cultural superiority. Then you get to the Cold War, and it shifts to this big ideological fight for freedom. And today, the strategy often leans on looking legitimate through legal means and international agreements. See, the language keeps changing, but that core goal, getting the public to say, okay, that stays exactly the same.
And this right here is the absolute key. It's not about the lie, it's about the spotlight. You shine a big, bright light on the very real humanitarian issues, or the genuine security threats. And while everyone's looking at that, other strategic interests, like energy security, can be taken care of in the background, without ever needing to be the main event. It's an incredibly effective way to make national interests and moral arguments look like they're one and the same.
But of course, we gotta be clear. Reality is messy. It's never just one thing, right? Motives are almost always a tangled mess of security, money, domestic politics, you name it. And it's totally possible for leaders to 100% believe in the moral reasons they're giving.
It just so happens that sometimes those moral reasons line up perfectly with some very strategic goals.
So we've seen the pattern play out over time, haven't we? From the civilizing mission all the way to the war on terror, the words change, but the job of that moral cover, it stays the same. So the question this leaves us with is a big one. Knowing this pattern exists, how does it change the way we listen to the news? How can it help us think a little more critically about the reasons we're given for what's happening in the world today?